Will Democrats in Congress find it easier to work with a White House that is more aligned with Gary Cohn than Steve Bannon? We're joined now by Patrick Murphy, former Democratic congressman from Florida's 18th District. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
You're described in our notes as a pro-business Democrat. Is that correct?
Yes. I was one of, I think, 8 CPAs in the Congress. That should explain it, right?
An accountant. How exciting.
Well, that's pro-business.
What do you make about Steve Bannon leaving the White House and Gary Cohn staying?
Well, it's certainly a shakeup, and I think this might be a small glimmer of an opportunity for President Trump to almost do a mea culpa and say, hey, I made some mistakes, and now we are going to have a new set of people. Nope, I don't believe it at all. I don't believe it at all. But if there is a glimmer of hope for getting tax reform done, for getting infrastructure done, it's going to have to be that mea culpa from him.
What if it's just basically less dysfunction and a more disciplined White House?
Then we're not going to get anything done, because unfortunately my friends in Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, have pretty much lost all respect for this president, for this administration, whether they think he's a narcissistic, whether they think he has got no agenda in over his head. They're pretty concerned right now with where this country's heading.
So, Mr. CPA, what would you like to see happen with the tax code?
Well, you're never going to get all sides to agree, but it starts by finding that middle ground. And I believe we need comprehensive reform. Unfortunately, I think what we're going to see, if anything at all, is going to be minor cuts, probably for the top 1%, maybe some business cuts. They are trying to push something through.
What would comprehensive reform look like? I mean, I know obviously that's a day-long
right.
discussion, but what would it look like to you?
Well, we got to start off by making sure that we're competitive as a country. So let's start off with corporate tax reform, bringing that 35% down to a number that doesn't have to be the lowest in the world, but it's got to be in the ballpark.
What
it's got to be, 15 to 20, maybe 25%.
15 to 20?
Says a Democrat.
Says a Democrat.
But
wow.
we got to get rid of the loopholes and deductions.
Okay.
Right.
This may actually raise the rate on corporate America, because the effective tax rate is around 22%, 21%. So if you do a hard cap at 25, it sounds lower, but if you kill the deductions, you actually may raise the corporate rate.
Exactly. And that's what takes so much time to study. And that's why I'm so, pessimistic that they're actually going to get this done before the end of the year.
How many CPAs did you say there were in Congress?
I think there were 8 when I was there.
There was 8. Okay, so it's
way more lawyers, by the way.
That's my point. There's 535 men and women on Capitol Hill, the majority of whom are attorneys.
Right.
Attorneys don't know a lot about numbers and taxes. Are you convinced that they can get something done and fully comprehend what they're doing?
Not by the end of the year. In fact, I would think it would take several years to get done. The few conversations I had as a CPA trying to, talk about a few bills I was putting forward, the gloss just comes over the eyes in the first 30 seconds. Most members of Congress, and I'm not trying to knock them, right? People have their own expertise.
Most people don't understand taxes.
But this is very complicated, and you need, a real leader who's going to really, roll up his or her sleeves and have an agenda here. And we don't have that out of this White House right now. And you've got a Congress that's really facing, in my opinion, a moral crisis, because you've got a lot of people that are continuing to put their party in front of this country and doing what's best, because they know what's best, but they don't want to lose their reelection.
So what's next? Do you give a high possibility that there'll be a good tax reform bill, or lower taxes between now and the end of the year, or not?
I'd say low possibility. If anything passes, in my opinion, it's going to be under reconciliation in the Senate, which means 50 votes. If they couldn't get health care done, which they've been talking about for 7 years, I find it hard to believe they're going to be able to get those 50 Republicans.
On this. Go ahead, Tom.
I assume there's more agreement on taxes than there was on health care, and going into that debate, as John Boehner said, they're not going to. One of our prior guests said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, does the idea that there has been so much turmoil focus the attention of the congressional caucuses in the GOP side to get something big done, because they need a win as much as the president does?
They need a win in a big way. And if I had to speculate, if they get anything done, it will be what I said earlier, and that is tax cuts for maybe some corporations, perhaps, some individuals. It will be minor. It will be for a few years. They can't pass anything under reconciliation that raises the deficit right over that 10-year period. So it's got to be temporary, and they're probably going to have to try to find some offsets, since they didn't pass the ACA cuts, the 800 or so, billion dollars there.
But I like what you're saying, because you're resetting the bar, Patrick. You're saying to the people, there's a chance tax reform is going to get done, but you've got to give it time. And tax cuts. And we live in the 24/7 news cycle, the immediacy of Twitter, everything else. How do you tell the American people, the Republican Party especially, we're going to get it done, you just got to be patient, because patience is one thing this country no longer seems to have a lot of.
The drama, around this White House and the chaos every day, the tweets, what just happened over the weekend, has got to stop, because you've got now Republican members of Congress starting to poll every single day. You see, when we get back, or when they get back in September, they've got to raise the debts and they've got to pass a budget. And then the polls start, and they start wondering, is it better to be aligned with President Trump, even in the smallest way, or to actually pass something, to do something?
If you were a GOP congressman right now,
yeah.
active, would you align yourself with Trump, or would you distance yourself from Trump, as if you were a Republican?
It'd be the same thing I would have done if I was still there as a Democrat, was to hope that on day one, President Trump said, hey, let's do something with infrastructure. Let's get people back to work. Let's do something with tax reform. Let's roll up our sleeves. This has been an 8 months basically wasted of any little bit of goodwill that he might have had. So at this point, it's going to be a really tough calculation for most Republicans, because they now have to deal with the moral question of where's this line with racism, with getting things done for the country.
Yeah,
there's a whole new element.
Much more complicated. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Pretty exciting for an accountant.
Yeah.
All right, let's bring in